Dear friends, before you start taking in the information from this course, I would like to advise you to take the time you need to really absorb it. First of all, the subject of this course is huge. It's about the preservation and continuation of human life on Earth in all of its aspects: economic, social, political, ecological, and so on. But it's also dizzying and even psychologically stressing to try to absorb the size of the challenges and the totality of the solutions that are needed. So when you watch this video, stop and repeat where you need to. Sometimes you may have to do it several times. Take enough time to understand the statistics and the graphs. And sometimes you may want to do your own research online to dig deeper. Good luck with it. We are here to support your journey, and remember, we're all in this together. Welcome to Module 2 of Climate Change, the Fight of Our Lives, from Emergency to Solutions. This module will be brought to you by Rob Delart. He will be speaking to you directly from the Amazon forest in Brazil, where he is living. He will start by introducing himself and the theme he'll be talking about.
Welcome to the second module of the World Climate School course on climate change. The title today is Climate Change, the Dire Consequences of a Warming Planet. We will talk about the consequences, the challenges, but also take a look at what can be done globally, and in some cases also we will touch on the situation in India, although in further modules you will hear much more about that. My name is Rob Delart. I live in Brazil, where I work on forest protection, reforestation, and rewilding an area where nature is under pressure and species are becoming extinct. I'm a board member of the World Climate School Norway, a supporter of the great movement Fridays for Future, and I'm especially focusing in my daily work on saving the Amazon forest. I will be your teacher for today. The planet is heating up fast. In this chart you see the scenarios which the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, has drawn in their reports. This United Nations group of experts is showing that there are several possibilities, as you can see. And depending on the amount of CO2 in the atmosphere, temperatures will increase this century by between 2 and 6 degrees centigrade. Right now we are on track for the worst case scenario, also called the business as usual scenario. It is the red line in the graph called the RCP 8.5 scenario, with a maximum of 5.4 C rise in temperature. And right now we are already at 1.2 degrees rise in 2020, and the effects are noticeable around the world, with a huge increase in extreme weather events, including more and stronger cyclones, floodings, heat waves, and droughts. Although no one knows for sure, we can assume that organized human civilization probably is incompatible with more than 3 degrees average rise in global temperature. So right now we're on a path which will be the end of organized human civilization. Global heating is causing the ice caps to melt, with new record melting seen all the time from the Greenland ice sheet and the Antarctica ice sheet. In this chart, you see that there is a possibility that by the end of this century, the total sea level rise could be up to 2.4 meters. All that is an extreme scenario, but more than a meter is very, very likely. Also, there's a lot of melting at the so-called third pole, which holds tens of thousands of glaciers on the central mountains of Asia, including the Hindu Kush, the Himalayas, and the Tibetan Plateau. Together, all the ice on land holds the potential of 65 meters of sea level rise. And the third pole in Asia is disgorging billions of tons of fresh water into the ocean via rivers like the Indus, the Ganges, the Brahmaputra, the Mekong, and the Yangtze-Kiang rivers. A total of about 1.5 billion people are dependent on the meltwaters of the rivers flowing from this third pole. The problem is also made worse because frozen areas in the north of on the north of the planet, the Siberian areas and areas in Canada and Alaska, the so-called permafrost areas, are beginning to melt, releasing trapped carbon. This could cause a vicious circle of increased CO2 into the atmosphere and further warming. Sea level rise is already affecting some low-lying areas around the world, including in Bangladesh, Vietnam, and the east coast of the United States. Especially in the river deltas in Asia, we see that already millions are affected, in causing migration of many of those who lose their land to the sea or due to salination. In Module 3, we will touch more on the situation in India, but already we would like to state that Mumbai is one of the cities that will be affected by a combination of sea level rise, more extreme rainfall events, and highly inadequate draining systems. On this slide, you see an overview of the cities that are at risk from sea level rise, including many large and known ones with populations of over 10 million, and many smaller as well. The IPCC report says that the global average sea level rise could now be up to 1.1 meter by 2100, but they do not include the risks of fast Antarctic melting due to ice sheet vulnerability and collapse. And there's a chance, as we saw in the last sheet, that it could reach and go beyond even 2 meters, which would bring enormous problems to the world. Anyway, it won't stop after that. It will go on for centuries. And rising sea levels here threaten about a total of 130 large coastal cities around the world, including many on tidal rivers. And as you can see, mega cities like London, New York, Karachi, Bangkok, Mumbai, Shanghai, and Jakarta are all already will be under threat during this century. Indonesia recently announced that it will move its capital city, Jakarta, to a new location on another island due to a combination of problems. And one of the reasons was the increased and projected flooding of the low-lying parts of the city due to sea level rise and sinking of soils, which is caused by the drainage of groundwater and the weight of all the buildings that are built there. So this city, which including its suburban areas has tens of millions of people, will have to be moved as a government seat, which and the cost of it are just tens and tens of billions of dollars. On this map you can see what a huge problem it will be if this really comes to pass. So global warming is of course the same as the increasing heat of atmosphere, of water, of land. And as you can see in this chart, we see that global temperatures have risen a lot, but on the land surface, much higher than on the ocean surface. The average air temperature overland has increased about double as much as those overseas. And record temperatures are being broken all the time around the world, with temperature records now regularly breaking the 50 degrees centigrade barriers in countries like Australia, the US, the Middle East, Pakistan and India. You may recall the terrible heat wave that struck India in the summer of 2019. Despite the heating caused by the increasing greenhouse gas levels in the atmosphere, the heating up of the planet's atmosphere is slowed because more than 90% of this excess heat generated by climate change is absorbed by the oceans. But the heat waves and the number of hot days are increasing fast around the world. And heat waves can burden health and emergency services, and also increase the strain on water and energy supplies and on transportation, resulting in power cuts and shortages or blackouts. They also affect food and the livelihood of people, and they can result in the loss of crops or livestock due to the extreme heat. Wealthy people often think they can be protected from the heat by their air conditioners during these heat waves. And even when the power grid goes off, expensive generators can give them the cool that they need. But air conditioners actually stop working with outside temperatures higher than 56 degrees, and those days are coming. While the number of people officially dying from heat stroke are maybe reported in the thousands per year, the actual number of people dying due to unbearable heat is in fact much, much higher and on the increase. So but let us zoom out a bit again and look at planet Earth, your home, my home, our only home. We live on this sphere floating through the endless space and heated by the sun, teeming with life. And all life on this amazing, exceptional planet is completely dependent on air, water and fertile soil. The thin layer of gases around our world and the bit of water that is there is making this piece of rock teeming with life. It is a miraculous place and it's an exceptional place. We haven't seen anything like it yet. When people think we are too small to make big changes on our planet, we need to realize that the total amounts of water, air and soil make up just a fraction of the total planet. This is a picture from the International Space Station, courtesy to NASA. And you can see the thin line of the Earth's atmosphere at the moment of the setting sun. It's clearly visible how thin it is. This thin layer of gas around our amazing planet is keeping you and me alive right now. And it is in fact partly the product of life itself. The oxygen was produced by bacteria that could live from energy of the sun and carbon dioxide in the water, producing oxygen as a waste product. The oxygen began to build up in the atmosphere while the carbon dioxide levels continued to drop. That oxygen, still being produced by plants, trees and algae today, is keeping us alive. And the CO2 that is recycled by nature is keeping our planet warm enough not to freeze to death. Without CO2 and methane in the atmosphere, the two most important greenhouse gases, Earth's average temperature would be around minus 18 degrees centigrade instead of the much warmer 15 degrees centigrade it is now globally year round, on average. The concentration of greenhouse gases has fluctuated naturally over geological timescales, resulting in ice ages and in hot periods when Antarctica was covered with forests. So now that you have seen how small the layer of gases is around the planet that keep us alive, the same or even more goes for water, and especially fresh water. Water, as you know, is crucial for life, and fresh water is crucial for life on land. But like air, the total amount of water is tiny compared to our planet. Here you see how our blue planet actually is made of rock with just a tiny bit of water. The larger two of the small water drops here in the picture signify all the water in the oceans, and the smaller one, hardly visible, signifies the fresh water in lakes, rivers and glaciers. Water evaporates and rains down, forming rivers and lakes and moisturing the land. And this ongoing process, called the water cycle or hydrocycle, is a crucial mechanism vital for all life on land. And the heating of the planet is disturbing the water cycle. For every degree centigrade increase in air temperature, the air can hold 7% more water vapor, increasing extreme rainfall events. Climate change is primarily caused by the increase of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere, as you know, but the second cause is that of the disruption of the water cycle. Water cools when it evaporates. That makes a forest 5 to 10 degrees cooler during a heat wave due to the evaporation power of the tree leaves and the shade under its canopy. Humans have removed a lot of these trees and also drained a lot of lakes and swamps, which balanced temperatures in those areas. We will see that apart from the very urgent necessity to stop the emissions of greenhouse gases fast, the second thing we need to focus on is balancing the water cycle and retaining water on land, in aquifers, in soils, and in vegetation. Another fact a lot of people are not aware of is the effect of heat on photosynthesis. Most life, and certainly human life, depends on plant growth for food directly, and for those who eat meat or use dairy products, to the plants those animals eat. We all know that plants don't grow without water. But what is lesser known is that plants stop to grow above 40 degrees centigrade because the process of photosynthesis simply stops. And high night temperatures also stunt the growth of rice, wheat and corn considerably. And these are some of the most important crops around the world. More nights over 24 degrees during the growing season decreases the harvest considerably, and extreme temperatures from 50 degrees centigrade and above simply kill most annual crops. So plants are threatened by both drought and by heat. At the same time, we can also find that air temperatures above 40 degrees centigrade hardly happen as long as the soil still holds moist that can evaporate. So moist soils are one of the best protections against extreme heat and the effects on food production. So keep this heat effect on food production in mind when thinking what the consequences are of global heating, of global warming. So let me stress once more that the first priority globally must be to stop the emission of greenhouse gases. There is no doubt about that. Yet we should also realize that there are many other ways in which we are affecting the natural balance that is vital for life. We are changing the world's habitats both on land and underwater. We have removed half of 6 billion trees globally in the last 2,000 years or so. And this has dried out many lands. Imagine what climate change can do and what we are doing to this planet. It's only 6,000 years ago that Northern Africa was a place of trees, of savannas, of grasslands, and some lakes, and people, nomadic people. Today we know it as the Sahara, the largest desert in the world. And half the topsoil on the planet has been lost in the last 150 years, mainly through agriculture and animal husbandry and the removal of forests. And using chemical fertilizer is only a temporary solution to the degraded topsoils. And the problem will worsen. So here on this slide you can see an overview of what is already happening. And on the sea we see especially the overfishing, which has collapsed fish stocks in many places. And ocean acidification, which is affecting many calcium holding skeletons of animals in the sea. While the disruption caused by us humans is extremely fast on geological timescales, it is relatively slow on a human timescale. And this forms a huge problem in us tackling the most dangerous problem we have ever encountered. Because climate change will kill many of us if we don't do anything about it. But because it is going relatively slow within the lifetime of a human, it is difficult to perceive. And we call this problem the shifting baseline of perception. Our grandfathers were used to large catches of large fishes, but that abundance has disappeared over decades, but very slowly. The same goes for landscapes, for rising temperatures, for the increasing water scarcity, for the changes in weather. And humans are great to fight acute crises, like a house on fire. But we're very bad at reacting to these slow deteriorations of the quality of life in our surroundings. The problem with climate change and related challenges is that by the time we realize and we feel the impact, we are too late to do something about it. Still, we do take a car insurance in case of an accident, or fire insurance in case of a fire. So why are we not taking insurance on the future of our children? We have to realize that our perception is not helping us to understand the problem, so we have to do it with our mind. Another terrible example of the changing baseline of perception is the fact that we hardly notice that millions of species of plants and animals are under threat of extinction or are already gone. The explosion of human population has triggered what we now call the sixth mass extinction. You can see here in this chart the increase of human population, and you see that actually very short time ago, in the modern age, about 200 years ago, suddenly it has gone up exponentially. The last great extinction wiped out the dinosaurs 65 million years ago, and that was caused by an asteroid. Right now we are in what people call the sixth mass extinction, which is wiping out species as fast as during that time, or maybe even faster. As the human population increases to grow, we consume more, destroy more habitat, kill more animals for food, release more pollution into the atmosphere, soil and water supply, all of which increases the rate of extinction of species. And species are disappearing at up to 100 times the normal rate, and as many as 1 million species could disappear by the end of this century, leaving behind a much poorer world. Still, it doesn't have to be that way, because by protecting our planet's habitats, we can both protect species from going extinct, and we can actually grow more and healthier food if we play our cards right. Please watch this 3-minute video from the Intergovernmental Science and Policy Platform on Biodiversity and Ecosystems Services, IPES. It is an organization under the umbrella of the United Nations that focuses on the health of our planet's biodiversity and ecosystem services, and formulates policies to protect the multitude of life on our planet. It is an important message and key in the total package of what we need to focus on in order to keep our planet livable.
Scientists estimate that billions of species have lived on Earth since life began around 3.5 billion years ago. And over the course of that time, 99% of them have become extinct. But scientists say we're now losing species at the fastest rate for millions of years. So what does this mean for the planet? And what does it mean for us?
So species go extinct normally. This is a natural process, but sometimes there are periods where a lot of species go extinct at a single event, and this is what it's called a mass extinction.
Scientists have identified 5 of these events in the history of the Earth, and from what they know, in each instance, around 75% of the planet's species disappeared over millions of years.
So we expect a number of species to go extinct every few thousands of years. But currently we have evidence of a large number of species that have already gone extinct in the past few decades or hundreds of years. And this is way higher than we'd expect just by chance. The expectation now is that the current extinction will be much faster. The most important factors is habitat transformation. This is particularly important in the tropics. Climate change, species exploitation, and pollution. As soon as climate change starts interacting with this lack of habitat that we find, then that's when we're going to start seeing thousands of species going extinct. There is the intrinsic value of a species. So polar bears are quite important for us, and orangutans are quite important for us. And those species, once extinct, they'll never come back. I don't think humans are likely to go extinct in the near future. We have incredibly broad needs, and we can live anywhere, we can eat anything. It is likely that the changes that we're causing, the environment, will drive us to wars or drive us to human conflict, and this may lead us to extinction. There are many things that we can do. In terms of habitat transformation, for instance, we can reduce deforestation in the tropics to 0, and all of this can be done without compromising the amount of food that we produce for ourselves. So there is no debate within the scientific community whether we need to save species or produce food. We can do both. But for climate change, we're just going to have to be more frugal, we're going to have to eat less meat, fly less, and just change our lifestyle.
While this course has climate change in its title, it is in fact an umbrella word to cover a whole range of interlinked challenges, some of which are mentioned in this list, the most important ones at least. And in order to understand our current situation, we need to take them all into account and understand the total context of challenges and solutions in order to get a system-wide idea of how to deal with this. So we're looking at climate change and extreme weather events, which is very much in the eye of many people. The energy challenge, the fossil fuels that we need to phase out, but how will we cover this with renewables? We have challenges about water, clean water for everybody and for agriculture, and food production challenges. Destruction of nature and loss of ecosystems and species extinction. Soil degradation and combined desertification. Fast population growth and the challenge of the viabilities of huge cities. We have the problem of increasing inequality globally and within countries, and of financial instability. We have the problems of pollution of air, water and land, increasing epidemics and pandemics, and increasing conflict due to all of the above and the stresses that climate change and all these challenges are bringing to us. But maybe the most important challenge is not mentioned in this list, and that is the lack of knowledge and education. That it is about the misinformation and denial that is floated in the knowledge universe. And because in the end, we have created our current human society with all its flaws, it is us, it is our conscience, is our way of thinking to get us out of this problem and find solutions. So we need to understand the whole picture with all the aspects that are driving this complex change and challenge. So from this list of challenges, we will just highlight a couple now in the next couple of slides. And a key challenge is that of fresh water supply and the connected food production. Water use has grown at more than twice the rate of the human population, which already has exploded over the last century. And that's in large part due to agriculture, which in India, for instance, accounts for 80% of all water use. And there are many facets to this problem. On this map, you see the amount of water drawn from groundwater supplies around the world, where in some countries the withdrawals are extremely high, which means that the aquifers are actually losing water in the dark red areas. If aquifers are not replenished, at some point that water supply is going to stop giving, and rich agricultural areas, like for instance the Punjab, will see major water crises if not taken care of. You see that India is one of the countries which is borrowing water from its aquifers right now in terms that is unsustainable. Together with the extreme weather events like heavy rains and floods, droughts and heat waves, food production is under severe pressure already. And it is a matter of time before there will be food crisis if we do not adequately answer these complex challenges. A completely different aspect of all the interconnected challenges is the connection between the financial systems, climate, water, and food, for instance. The global financial system is globally interconnected and based on the value of underlying assets. Debts are basically borrowed from future productivity and profits, based on which loans are provided. Right now, global outstanding debt is already above 3 years of total global production. In other words, we need totally 3 years of global GDP if we were to repay all the outstanding debt. But more and more of those assets are becoming doubtful. a high-rise that gets flooded due to sea level rise, coal power plant that needs to pay taxes for pollution and becomes unprofitable. Those are just two examples of what could happen. Climate change also hits profits in, for instance, the agricultural sector, healthcare, and fisheries. Huge costs are already incurring. The costs related to India's economy for air pollution alone was an estimated 5.4% of GDP in India in 2019, according to an article in the Economic Times. And Indonesia has decided to move its capital from Jakarta, costing tens of billions of dollars, just to keep the city working. Oil-producing countries see their main assets lose value because of the energy transition to renewables. And a powerful cyclone can hit the stock market, so to speak. All these elements can create shocks to the global financial system and could lead to financial crises much larger than the one we had in 2008. The world economy works as an ecosystem that is completely interconnected and connected to the state of nature and the climate. All these interactive challenges are a great and increasing burden on the health of economies around the world. It is just a matter of time before these stress factors combined will hit the global economy in ways the COVID-19 pandemic is foreshadowing right now. These large events will decrease the resilience of billions of people, making their livelihoods more insecure and meager, or even worse. So in the previous slides, we have just been looking at a few of these challenges that in combination hold a real possibility of societal collapse through a number of stress factors combined, including the possibility of popular protests and uprisings. Collapse of societies are very common throughout history, but now we are entering a time where we could see a widespread global collapse due to all these factors and the stress multiplier effect of climate change around the world. The Syrian civil war is unfortunately now a classic example how pressures from drought and migration combined with rising food prices and differences between various segments of society plus brutal oppression made the society explode. And now, almost a decade later, the country is still in a state of collapse. Climate change typically works as a threat multiplier, for instance, because farmers lose their crops or extreme heat causes the electric grid to collapse. All these elements can drive a collapse of society, triggering untold suffering and death. Societies that can build their resilience, that adapt to these factors fast enough, may be able to avoid tragic outcomes like this. And that is what this course is all about. Please watch this cartoon for a lighter moment of this heavy information. And it is about the famous frogs being slowly boiled in a pot because they cannot come to the right conclusion about their situation and how to get out of it. Real frogs, by the way, jump out of the pan at some point. So let's hope that humans are as smart as frogs. There seems to be a natural human tendency to choose comfort over truth, to dabble in wishful thinking when the truth challenges our previously held worldviews, especially if it's one that is as disturbing or alarming as climate change and all the challenges coming at us. And we spend a lot of time and energy fighting each other over what is real, and that means that people deny things or water it down. But fortunately, time and again, humans have proven to solve massive problems when we agree on the causes and the solutions. The problem with our particular set of challenges is that we are running out of time, and the combined challenges are enormous and partly invisible. Yet, So what is needed is a courage to face up to the reality of the situation before it's too late. And however you look at it, we are already very late in the process. So what did we try so far? And what can we do? Together we have been working on agreements for the last 3 decades to slow down the destruction on our planet due to climate change, overconsumption, the destruction of nature, and the effects of pollution on water, land, and in the air. But while small successes have been made, overall the situation is still rapidly getting worse, despite all these attempts. And the combination of all these crises is what we call a super wicked problem, a very complex problem, difficult to fully understand, with solutions which are often slow and create new problems. For instance, phasing out fossil fuels is absolutely necessary, but almost impossible to do fast enough without collapsing the world economy. And it asks wealthy nations and people to reduce their footprint and transfer wealth from the north to the south. Several large conferences and treaties have been negotiated. The oldest is the Kyoto Protocol from 1992, when nations decided to reduce their greenhouse gas emissions, but so far with hardly any effects. The Convention on Biological Diversity tried to protect nature, again with little effect around the world. Right now we are in the middle of implementing the Sustainable Development Goals, which were formulated in 2012. And they are getting some traction, but still there's a long way to go. The objective of the SDGs, as they are known, was to produce a set of universal goals that meet the urgent environmental, political, and economic challenges facing our world. And the most famous of them all was the Paris Agreement, agreed in 2015 at the COP21 conference in Paris. It was unanimously adopted to cut back global greenhouse gases to keep global warming of the planet below 2 degrees centigrade and preferably to maximum 1.5 centigrade. But it was done through voluntary national climate plans, and so far they don't add up to reaching these goals. So again, here it has to accelerate around the world. Right now the effects are at best too slow to keep those goals, and in fact we are still emitting according to the most disastrous worst case scenarios of the IPCC, which we saw earlier, the RCP 8.5 scenario, which would get us to maybe up to 6 degrees centigrade warming by the end of this century. The largest polluter in the world, the USA, left the agreement but will luckily rejoin under Biden again. Only the COVID-19 pandemic has had a slightly positive effect on global emissions, but this is by far not enough. The effect of the pandemic probably has had a more important effect on us to reflect for a moment what situation we are in and how we can get out of it better, because that is what our challenge is. For just another light moment, please look at this cartoon, which is already a decade older. So we get to this situation where we are just looking at huge challenges, and no, it's not a hoax. But the debate is over about climate change. But the challenges are real and enormous. And the challenge goes for everyone, everywhere. And the list of what we have to do is enormous. But if we succeed to do indeed all these great changes, we can create a much better world for our children and future generations, including livable cities, renewable energy, clean water and air, a healthy environment for our children, and green jobs and beautiful nature. So that is what we are here for. Much needs to happen, but what does it mean in practice? We need to cut burning of fossil fuels as fast as possible. We need a water revolution, a food revolution, an energy revolution. We need to restore nature in our landscapes, create climate smart cities, and create climate smart rural communities. And most of all, we need a revolution of ourselves, our thinking. We need to realize that we are all in this together, and together we will swim, or together we will sink. I cannot stress enough that cutting the burning of fossil fuels needs to be the number one priority everywhere. But that's easier said than done. As you can see in this chart, emissions have skyrocketed since we had the Kyoto Treaty. Since the signing of that protocol, we have gone up from 22 gigatons of CO2 emissions per year to 37 gigatons in 2019. While other stronger greenhouse gases like methane and nitrooxygen have gone up strongly as well. This means we are fast approaching the amount of CO2 in the atmosphere that could easily breach the 2 degrees warming limit that we have set for ourselves. If nothing changes fast, we will race past that limit before this decade is out, accumulating enough greenhouse gases to breach this 2 degrees centigrade limit. The full effect of CO2 released in the atmosphere reaches its peak only after a decade or so. So the warming we are now experiencing is largely from emissions up to 10 years ago. Especially the US, China, India and Russia need to do more, as well as the richest 10% of global citizens, which need to reduce their footprint. On a positive note, India recently came with their climate projections and was the only large country that could actually show that it was on target for its own goals. So, and especially the rich people need to do more, because the richest 10% of global citizens are responsible for half of all emissions. While the world is trying to cut down greenhouse gas emissions, meanwhile the world also has to prepare for more heat, more droughts, more floods, more extreme weather events. Key to the resilience of society is the water revolution, the water cycle. That means managing water at all stages of the water cycle, with top priorities of better irrigation management in agriculture, better water catchment and storage, increased soil moisture and increased vegetation, which holds moisture and water in its green mass. But many more things can be done, and if we look at making society resilient, this is one of the first things that we need to look at: a water revolution. What we certainly also need is a food revolution. Again, there are so many aspects to this that we can only scratch the surface here, and all changes are strongly interlinked with the water cycle and the water revolution. Earlier we mentioned some of the most important elements people need to look at while changing the agriculture, like changing agriculture, changing our diets, rewarding farmers to take care of their lands, reducing meat intake, shift to fish, start growing food in cities, let farmers earn money by drawing down CO2 and adding carbon to soil, creating food forests and applying permaculture design, growing new variety of crops that are more drought and heat resistant, but also salt resistant. and reducing our food waste, because in the whole chain of growing up to eating food, up to 40% of food can be wasted. Each of these subjects could be a separate module, and maybe we will develop those next year. But what we need to realize is that if we want to go to a transition to a sustainable economic future, little of the current food production methods will survive this crucial change. Less meat and dairy is one of the major issues. More fish and fish farming, urban and high-rise farming, more local food markets, carbon negative farming, food forests, all these elements will come to play as part of this food revolution. Lots to think about. Quite often people talk about reforestation as a way to balance nature, but actually we need to understand this as complete landscape restoration, which is a planned process that aims to bring back ecological balance, increase the quality of life of people and animals living in that area, and including opportunities for wild animals and birds to live there as well. Deforested areas and dried out abandoned lands need to be revived. Natural water storage needs to be improved, and degraded landscapes improved from a perspective of vegetation, water storage, food production, wildlife and beauty. There was an inventory made recently, and almost 1 billion hectares of degraded land around the world is ready to be revitalized, regenerated. And if so, it would help a lot to balance our climate. And yes, it would include planting 1 trillion trees around the world. Of course, we cannot tackle everything in this one short module, but just to give you an example of this infrared picture on a hot day in a square in Sydney. And you see that the temperature differences between under the trees and near to a metal board is as much as 16 degrees. This alone will give you enough information on how you can deal with heat in cities, which is definitely something that needs to happen. So now we have seen some of the aspects of the complete transformation of the way we do economics and we run our societies. I would like to leave you with, please have a donut. We will use this economic model, which is quite simple, to as an anchor to understand and integrate all the challenges and the solutions. Basically, the green area, the donut, is where we should stay, and it is within the ecological ceiling of our planetary boundaries, which include that we cannot do activities that increase climate change, ocean acidification, and so on. There are 9 factors here. And also that we should give everybody a life and a livelihood that takes care of the minimum necessities, the social foundations. So I would like you just take a look at it at home, because the donut economics is going to be a pillar of the way we want to propose a restructuring of our economic thinking. So summing up, our current situation means that in order to change everything, we will need everyone. Nature does not negotiate. We need to listen to her demands. And the world is at a crossroads. Creating a sustainable human society is no longer a nice to have, it's a must. We either transform the way we are living, or nature will transform us. We can do this if we make the love of all life our first priority. Yes, we are in a hurry. This is a decade where we make the great turn, and you are key to those changes. Thank you for being here. On the last slide, you will see a number of articles which we would like you to read for the next session, including, of course, Module 3, which will be available to you soon. Thank you so much and have a nice evening.
This is all for today. Thank you for your attention. You'll find the links to your homework in the description below this video. I'm looking forward to seeing you again soon, so I'll say goodbye for now.